What if I told you that a single folded piece of paper could bring down an $8 billion empire? That a waitress working 3 jobs to support her daughter would become the most dangerous threat to one of America's most powerful billionaires? This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Sarah Mitchell, a single mother who served the same wealthy customer every Tuesday night for months, never knowing he was the man who murdered her best friend. When she finally discovered the truth, she had a choice: stay silent and keep her family safe, or risk everything to seek justice for a crime the entire system wanted buried. Julian Cross thought he was untouchable. He owned senators, judges, and police detectives. He could make people disappear with a phone call and buy his way out of any consequence. He'd already killed 7 people to protect his criminal empire, and he was prepared to kill again. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated a mother's love and a friend's loyalty. What you're about to hear is a story of corporate corruption, government conspiracy, and murder at the highest levels of American society. It's a story about what happens when ordinary people refuse to let evil triumph, even when fighting back could cost them everything they hold dear. You'll discover how a tech billionaire sold millions of Americans' private data to foreign governments, how he murdered whistleblowers and journalists who tried to expose him, and how one woman's courage brought justice to the most powerful criminal in America. This story will shock you, inspire you, and maybe change how you think about power, justice, and what one person can accomplish when they refuse to give up. So get comfortable, because for the next hour, you're going to hear about the note that brought down a billionaire and the woman who proved that sometimes David really can defeat Goliath. The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the mahogany tables of the Sterling, Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse, where reservations required 6 months advance notice and a credit check that eliminated 90% of New York's population. Sarah Mitchell moved between tables with practiced grace, her black uniform pressed despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like lead. At 28, she had perfected the art of invisibility that good servers required, especially when serving clients who could buy and sell her entire world with a signature on a napkin. The restaurant's interior was a study in understated wealth. Rich burgundy leather banquettes lined walls decorated with original oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. The soft clink of silverware against bone china created a rhythm that spoke of civilization and refinement. Though Sarah knew that many of the men dining here tonight had built their fortunes on decidedly uncivilized practices. Table 12 had been requesting her specifically for 8 months now. Julian Cross sat alone as always, his tailored charcoal suit probably worth more than Sarah's annual rent on her cramped Queens apartment. The tech billionaire never looked up from his phone while ordering, treating her like expensive furniture that happened to speak. His perfectly styled silver hair caught the light as he scrolled through what Sarah assumed were stock prices or acquisition targets or whatever it was that men worth $8 billion did with their time. Sarah had memorized every detail about Julian Cross during her months of serving him. He always arrived at exactly 7:30 on Tuesday evenings. He always ordered the same thing. He never brought companions, never made small talk, never asked about her day, or acknowledged her as anything more than a service provider. Most servers would find this preferable to the handsy married executives or the trust fund kids who treated waitstaff like personal servants. But Sarah found Julian's cold indifference somehow more unsettling than outright rudeness. "Good evening, Mr. Cross," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your usual this evening?" Julian finally glanced up, his pale blue eyes the color of winter ice. There was an intelligence in those eyes that missed nothing, but also a coldness that suggested whatever thoughts lived behind them rarely concerned themselves with human warmth or empathy. "The Wagyu medium rare, and bring the Screaming Eagle Cabernet, the 1998 vintage." "Of course, sir." As Sarah turned to leave, Julian's voice stopped her with the precision of a scalpel. "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know. What's your last name again?" Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She had been dreading this moment for 3 years, ever since she'd started working at the Sterling with the specific goal of getting close to Julian Cross. The careful research, the forged references, the months of perfect service building up to this conversation. "Mitchell, sir. Sarah Mitchell." "Hmm." Julian's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes like a snake moving beneath still water. Friend of mine had a similar look about her. Emily Chen. Bright girl. Very talented data analyst. Tragic what happened to her. The mention of Emily's name hit Sarah like a physical assault, but she forced her expression to remain professionally pleasant. Her best friend. Her roommate at Columbia Law School. The woman who had died 3 years ago in what the New York Police Department had officially classified as suicide. But what Sarah knew in her bones was cold-blooded murder. I'm very sorry for your loss, sir. Julian smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. It was the smile of a predator who enjoyed playing with his food before consuming it. Thank you, Sarah. She was working on something quite important before she died. Something about corporate data privacy policies. Such a shame she couldn't handle the pressure of her position. The tech industry can be very demanding, especially for young women who perhaps bite off more than they can chew. Sarah felt her hands begin to tremble and clasped them behind her back. Emily Chen had been the strongest, most principled person she'd ever known. She would never have jumped from the roof of her Manhattan apartment building, no matter how much pressure she faced at work. Emily had been planning to expose something massive at Cross Technologies, something that had gotten her killed. I'll get your wine right away, Mr. Cross. Sarah walked to the wine cellar on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She had spent 3 years gathering evidence, working multiple jobs to pay for private investigators, attending law school part-time to understand the legal system that had failed her friend so completely. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment, and now she finally had what she needed to make Julian Cross pay for what he'd done. The Sterling's wine cellar was a temperature-controlled cathedral of vintage bottles, each one worth more than Sarah made in a month. She found the Screaming Eagle Cabernet, her hands steady now that the moment of truth was approaching. Emily's encrypted laptop was hidden in her locker upstairs, containing files that would expose Julian Cross as not just a murderer, but a traitor who had been selling American citizens' private data to hostile foreign governments. When Sarah returned to Julian's table, she poured the deep red wine into his crystal glass with the ceremonial precision the Sterling demanded. Julian swirled the wine, inhaled its bouquet, and nodded his approval with the arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Will there be anything else tonight, Mr. Cross? No, Sarah. That will be all. Sarah placed the leather check folder on the table with deliberate care. Underneath it, nearly invisible against the dark mahogany, lay a small piece of paper folded into a precise square. 3 years of investigation, 3 years of grief and rage and careful planning, condensed into a message that would change both their lives forever. Julian didn't notice the note until Sarah was halfway across the restaurant, clearing tables and maintaining the fiction that this was just another ordinary Tuesday evening. She was watching from behind the bar when his manicured fingers found the paper, when his face went completely white as he read the words she had written in careful block letters. I know what you did to Emily Chen. I have the files she died protecting. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 11 p.m., or I go to the FBI with everything. The note wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Julian's eyes snapped up immediately, scanning the restaurant with the desperate intensity of a cornered animal, until they found Sarah. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they stared at each other across the crowded dining room. Sarah saw surprise, fear, and calculation flash across his features before his mask of composed indifference slammed back into place. Then Julian carefully folded the note, placed it in his jacket pocket, and stood up. He walked toward the exit without paying his check, something that had never happened in the 5 years Sarah had worked at the Sterling. As he passed the hostess station, Sarah heard him speak quietly to Maria, the evening manager. Please extend my compliments to the kitchen and ensure that Sarah receives recognition for her exceptional service tonight. The words sounded like a threat wrapped in silk. Sarah's shift manager, Craig, appeared at her elbow as the restaurant's front door closed behind Julian Cross. What the hell was that about? I've never seen Cross leave without settling his check. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I have no idea, Sarah lied, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. But she did know. She knew about the encrypted files Emily had hidden in 3 different locations before her death. Files that proved Julian Cross had been systematically harvesting personal data from Cross Technologies' social media platforms and selling it to foreign intelligence services. Medical records, financial information, private communications, location data, all sold to the highest bidder, including several governments that were actively hostile to American interests. Emily had been Cross Technologies' head of data security when she discovered the operation. She'd tried to report it through proper channels, only to be threatened, harassed, and eventually murdered when she refused to stay quiet. The files contained emails, financial records, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of Cross's treasonous activities going back over 5 years. Sarah finished her shift in a daze, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong over the next 24 hours. Julian Cross was worth $8 billion and had connections that reached into the highest levels of government, law enforcement, and corporate America. What could one part-time law student and full-time waitress possibly do against that kind of power? But as Sarah took the subway back to Queens, she thought about Emily's infectious laugh, her passionate belief in justice, her dreams of using technology to make the world a better place. She thought about the other victims whose data had been sold, leaving them vulnerable to identity theft, blackmail, and worse. She thought about what Emily would have done if their positions were reversed. Sometimes David really did have to face Goliath. Sometimes there was no choice but to fight, even when the odds were impossible, and the cost could be everything you held dear. As the train pulled into her station, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Some doors are better left unopened, Sarah. Think carefully about your daughter's future before you make any irreversible decisions." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Julian Cross knew her real name, knew about Lily, knew exactly how to hurt her where it would matter most. The war had already begun. Sarah's one-bedroom apartment in Queens felt smaller than usual as she spread Emily's hidden files across her kitchen table, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that would reveal the face of a monster. The apartment was a study in careful budgeting and determined optimism. Second-hand furniture arranged to maximize space, law school textbooks stacked on every available surface, and Lily's artwork covering the refrigerator in a riot of crayon colors that somehow made everything feel more hopeful. 3 years of careful investigation had led to this moment. The laptop Emily had given her just days before her death contained enough evidence to destroy Julian Cross's empire and send him to federal prison for the rest of his life, assuming Sarah could find someone with the courage to prosecute one of America's most powerful men. "Mommy, why are you up so late again?" Sarah looked up to see her 6-year-old daughter standing in the doorway in her favorite pajamas, the ones with cartoon owls that Emily had bought for her 3rd birthday. Dark circles under Lily's brown eyes reminded Sarah that her obsession with Emily's case was taking a toll on everyone in their small family. "Just working on a school project, baby. Go back to bed." Lily patted over on bare feet and climbed onto Sarah's lap, studying the documents spread across the table with the intense curiosity that made her such a good student. "Is this about Aunt Emily again?" Sarah's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't afford to show. Emily had been the closest thing to family they'd had after Lily's father abandoned them when she was just 6 months old. Emily had stepped in as surrogate aunt, emergency babysitter, homework helper, and best friend. Her death had shattered both their worlds in ways Sarah was still trying to repair. "Yes, sweetheart, but I'm almost done with this part. I promise." "Are you going to make the bad people go to jail?" The simple question from her daughter's lips made Sarah's mission feel both more urgent and more impossible. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes bad people don't go to jail because they have enough money to buy their way out of consequences? "I'm going to try my very best, Lily. That's all we can ever do." After tucking Lily back into bed and reading her 2 chapters from their current bedtime book, Sarah returned to the evidence that had consumed her life for 3 years. Emily's files detailed a systematic operation to steal personal data from Cross Technologies' suite of social media platforms, which collectively had over 2 billion users worldwide. Medical records, financial information, private messages, browsing histories, location data, even psychological profiles based on user behavior patterns. All of it harvested without consent and sold to the highest bidder in what amounted to the largest violation of privacy in human history. The buyers weren't just marketing companies or data brokers. Emily's files showed payments from foreign intelligence services, terrorist organizations, and criminal enterprises. American citizens' most intimate secrets were being weaponized against them by hostile foreign powers, and Julian Cross was making billions of dollars facilitating the entire operation. Emily had been Cross Technologies' head of data security, which gave her access to the company's most sensitive systems. She'd discovered the operation gradually, following digital breadcrumbs that led deeper and deeper into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate and government power. The files contained emails where Cross discussed specific sales to foreign governments, financial records showing payments to offshore accounts, and even recorded conversations where Cross bragged about having senators and federal judges in his pocket. Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number that had threatened her earlier. "Cancel your meeting with the FBI, Sarah. Some things are better left buried. Like your friend." Sarah's hands shook as she read the message. Julian was already moving against her, less than 4 hours after receiving her note. She looked toward Lily's bedroom and felt a cold terror settle in her chest like ice water. What kind of monster threatened a child to protect his criminal empire? But then she thought about Emily, who had died trying to do the right thing despite knowing the risks. Sarah couldn't let her friend's sacrifice be meaningless, couldn't let Julian Cross continue destroying lives just because he had enough money to make problems disappear. She spent the rest of the night making copies of everything. USB drives hidden in different locations throughout the apartment, cloud storage accounts with encrypted passwords, printed documents in a safety deposit box she'd rented under her maiden name. If Julian wanted to play intimidation games, she would be ready. At 6 a.m., Sarah's phone rang with a call that made her stomach drop. Her shift supervisor at the Sterling was calling, which never happened unless something was seriously wrong. "Sarah, I'm really sorry about this, but I have to let you go. Corporate decision, effective immediately." "What? Why? I've never had a single complaint in 5 years." I know, believe me, this wasn't my choice. HR said it was performance-related, but between you and me, this came from way up the chain, like scary high up. Someone specifically wanted you gone." Sarah hung up and stared at her sleeping daughter. She'd just lost one of her 3 jobs, which meant they'd struggle to make rent this month, even if she picked up extra shifts at her other positions. But she couldn't back down now, not when she was so close to getting justice for Emily. She called her ex-boyfriend, Danny Rodriguez, who worked as an investigative journalist for the New York Tribune. They'd broken up 2 years ago when Sarah's obsession with Emily's case began consuming her life. But Danny was one of the few people who'd always believed her about the murder. "Danny, I need your help. I finally have the evidence we need to bring down Julian Cross." "Sarah, we've been through this before. The police investigated Emily's death. The medical examiner ruled it suicide. I can't keep chasing conspiracy theories. This isn't a theory anymore. I have emails, financial records, recorded conversations. Julian Cross killed Emily because she discovered he was committing treason on a massive scale." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "If you really have evidence like that, bring it to my office. But Sarah, for God's sake, be careful. Cross has destroyed people for a lot less than what you're talking about." As Sarah prepared to leave for the Tribune building, she looked back at Lily, still sleeping peacefully in her small bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and children's books. She was doing this for her daughter as much as for Emily. In a world where billionaires could literally get away with murder, someone had to stand up and fight for justice, even if that someone was just a single mother with everything to lose and nothing left to fear. Sarah kissed Lily's forehead and whispered a promise she hoped she'd be alive to keep. "Mommy's going to make the world a little bit safer for you, baby girl, no matter what it costs." The New York Tribune's offices occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in Lower Manhattan, a deliberate rejection of the glass and steel towers where most media companies house themselves. The newsroom buzzed with controlled chaos as Sarah navigated through cubicles toward Danny Rodriguez's desk. Reporters typed frantically on keyboards that had seen better decades. Phones rang constantly with tips and threats and desperate pleas for attention, and the smell of coffee and deadline stress filled the air like incense in a church dedicated to the pursuit of truth. Danny looked up as she approached, his dark eyes immediately focusing on the manila envelope clutched against her chest like a shield. At 32, he'd already won a Pulitzer for his investigation into police corruption, but Sarah could see the skepticism in his expression. He'd heard her theories about Emily's murder dozens of times over the past 3 years, and each previous conversation had ended with insufficient evidence and mounting frustration. "You look like hell, Sarah." "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear when she's about to blow up the biggest story of your career." Danny's expression softened despite their complicated history. They'd been together for almost 2 years before Emily's death, and Sarah's obsession with the case had slowly poisoned their relationship until Danny felt like he was competing with a ghost for Sarah's attention. "I'm sorry about the Sterling. Word travels fast in this industry when someone gets fired from a high-profile restaurant. Cross's people called your manager directly, didn't they?" Sarah felt her stomach drop several floors. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've been getting calls too. 3 different sources warned me off any story involving Cross Technologies in the past 6 hours. That tells me you might actually have something real this time, or Cross wouldn't be working so hard to shut down coverage before it starts." Sarah placed the envelope on his desk with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. Emily downloaded everything before she died: financial records showing payments to foreign governments, email chains discussing specific data sales, recorded conversations where Cross admits to committing treason. This isn't speculation anymore, Danny. This is evidence that would hold up in federal court. Danny opened the envelope and began scanning the documents, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. Sarah watched his journalist instincts kick in as he recognized the scope and implications of what Emily had uncovered. "Jesus Christ, Sarah. This is massive. If even half of this is verifiable, it's not just a business scandal or a privacy violation. Cross has been selling classified information to hostile foreign governments. That's espionage. That's treason. Emily died because she tried to stop him. Now he's coming after me for having the evidence she left behind." "What do you mean, coming after you?" Sarah showed him the threatening text messages she'd received. Danny's face darkened as he read them, his protective instincts overriding their complicated romantic history. "Pack a bag right now. You and Lily are staying with me until this story breaks and crosses in federal custody. I'm calling my editor immediately." For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt something that might have been hope. Danny was an award-winning investigative journalist with contacts throughout law enforcement and government. If anyone could bring down Julian Cross, it was him. 3 hours later, Danny's editor, Patricia Wang, sat across from them in a conference room lined with journalism awards, framed front pages from major stories, and photographs of reporters shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. Patricia had been reviewing Emily's files with the Tribune's legal team, and Sarah could see the excitement in her eyes as she recognized the potential impact of the story. "This is incredible work," Patricia said, her voice carrying the reverence reserved for truly historic scoops. "But Cross Technologies is one of our major advertisers, and they have a legal team that could tie us up in court for years. We need to be absolutely certain about our sources and our evidence before we move forward." Danny leaned forward in his chair. Emily Chen was Cross's head of data security. She had legitimate access to all of these systems and files. These aren't secondhand rumors or anonymous tips. These are primary source documents from someone with the highest level of security clearance. Patricia nodded slowly, already mentally planning the coverage. "Give me 72 hours to get this past our legal department and verify the authentication of the digital files. If everything checks out, we'll run it as our Sunday front page story with a full digital rollout. That gives us maximum impact and the longest news cycle." Sarah felt tears of relief well up in her eyes. Finally, after 3 years of fighting alone, she had allies with the resources and platform to seek justice for Emily. But as they left the Tribune building and walked toward Danny's car, Sarah noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The same car she'd seen outside her apartment that morning when she left to bring Lily to school. When they walked toward Danny's Honda, the sedan's engine started with a purr that sounded expensive and predatory. "Danny," Sarah whispered, "I think we're being followed." Danny glanced over his shoulder with the casual motion of someone checking the time, but Sarah saw his body tense as he spotted their surveillance. "Get in the car. Now. Don't look back." As they drove through Manhattan traffic, the black sedan stayed exactly 3 cars behind them with the precision of a professional surveillance team. Danny took several random turns through neighborhoods that made no sense for their route, but their tale remained constant and patient. "This isn't amateur hour," Danny muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Cross has professional security contractors following you. Military or intelligence background, most likely." Sarah's phone buzzed with another text message, and her blood turned to ice as she read it. "Last warning, Sarah. Drop the story or face the consequences. Your daughter's very pretty, by the way. Such a bright smile." The text included a photograph taken that morning of Lily walking into her elementary school, her backpack decorated with cartoon characters, and her face lit up with the innocent joy that made Sarah's heart break every single day. "They're threatening Lily," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Danny's knuckles went even whiter on the steering wheel. "That's it. We're going to the FBI right now. This just became a federal case involving threats against a child." But as they pulled up to the federal building in Lower Manhattan, Sarah's phone rang with a call that made her entire world collapse. "Miss Mitchell, this is Principal Morrison from PS 234. There's been an incident with Lily. You need to come to the school immediately." Sarah's heart stopped beating. "What kind of incident? Is she hurt? Has someone taken her?" "Child Protective Services is here. They've received an anonymous report alleging neglect and unsafe living conditions. They're requesting to take Lily into protective custody pending a full investigation." The world tilted around Sarah like a ship taking on water. Julian Cross wasn't just threatening her career or her safety. He was weaponizing the very systems designed to protect children, turning them into instruments of intimidation and control. "Danny, we have to go to the school, right now." As they raced through traffic with Danny's emergency flashers on, Sarah realized she drastically underestimated her enemy. Julian Cross didn't just have money and political connections. He had the ability to corrupt and manipulate every institution she might turn to for help, and he was just getting started. PS 234. Elementary looked like any other New York public school from the outside, with its red brick facade and chain-link fence surrounding a small playground. But as Sarah ran through its hallways, it felt like a fortress under siege. The familiar smell of disinfectant and children's lunches couldn't mask the tension that hung in the air like smoke from an unseen fire. She burst into Principal Morrison's office to find Lily sitting in an oversized chair, her small face streaked with tears, while two stern-faced social workers reviewed paperwork with the methodical efficiency of bureaucrats who'd forgotten they were dealing with human lives rather than case numbers. "Mommy!" Lily launched herself into Sarah's arms with the desperate intensity of a drowning person grabbing a life preserver. "It's okay, baby. Everything's going to be okay. Mommy's here." The lead social worker, a middle-aged woman named Janet Williams, cleared her throat with the sound of authority being asserted. "Miss Mitchell, we've received serious allegations about your daughter's living situation. The report includes claims of unsupervised late-night activities, inappropriate materials in the home, potential exposure to dangerous individuals, and general neglect of the child's welfare." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the accusations. They were obviously fabricated, but Child Protective Services was legally obligated to investigate any complaint, regardless of its source or motivation. The system was designed to err on the side of protecting children, which made it a perfect weapon for someone with the resources to manipulate it. "These charges are completely false. Who made this report?" Janet Williams consulted her clipboard with the practiced indifference of someone who'd heard similar denials countless times. "Anonymous reports are confidential under state law. However, the caller provided specific details about your apartment layout, your work schedules, and your daughter's daily routine that suggests someone with intimate knowledge of your living situation." Danny stepped forward, showing his press credentials with the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with government officials. "I'm Danny Rodriguez with the New York Tribune. This woman is cooperating with federal authorities on a major criminal investigation. This appears to be retaliation against a potential witness." Janet Williams barely glanced at his identification. "Mr. Rodriguez, media attention doesn't change our obligation to protect children. Miss Mitchell, we need to conduct a home inspection immediately. Until that's completed and the allegations are investigated, Lily will need to stay with an approved guardian or enter temporary foster care." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her with the inexorable force of a trash compactor. Julian Cross had found the perfect weapon against her. Even if she eventually proved the allegations false, the investigation would take weeks or months. By then, any momentum for Emily's story would be lost, and Cross would have time to destroy evidence and eliminate other potential witnesses. "She can stay with me," Danny offered. "I'm on the approved emergency guardian list for the city." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Since when?" "Since I dated Rebecca Martinez 3 years ago. She had 2 kids and I went through the background check process. I never took my name off the list after we broke up." It was a temporary solution, but Sarah felt some of the crushing weight lift from her chest as they completed the paperwork that would allow Lily to stay with Danny rather than entering the foster care system. The process took 2 hours of forms and interviews and bureaucratic procedures that felt designed to maximize stress and minimize hope. As they drove to Danny's apartment in Brooklyn, Lily clutched her favorite stuffed elephant and stared out the window with the solemn expression of a child trying to understand why her world was falling apart. Sarah sat in the back seat next to her daughter, holding her hand and fighting back tears of rage and helplessness. Danny's phone rang as they climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment. He answered with his usual journalist efficiency, but his face went pale as he listened to whoever was speaking. "What do you mean in the hospital? When did this happen?" Danny sank onto his couch, running his hand through his hair with the gesture of someone receiving terrible news. "Is she going to be okay? Do they know who was driving?" "What is it?" Sarah asked, though she already feared the answer. "Patricia Wang was in a car accident 2 hours ago. Hit-and-run driver in a stolen vehicle. She's in intensive care, unconscious, with traumatic brain injuries. The doctors don't know if she'll wake up." Sarah felt the room spin around her like a carnival ride designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. And without Patricia's approval, the Tribune won't run the story. Her deputy editor is too scared of the legal liability, especially with Cross's lawyers already making threatening phone calls. They sat in stunned silence as the full scope of Julian Cross's power became clear. He could destroy careers with a phone call, manipulate government agencies to attack his enemies, and apparently orchestrate traffic accidents to silence journalists who threatened his interests. Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message from the same unknown number. "I offered you a reasonable way out, Sarah. You chose to escalate instead. Now your journalist friend's editor is fighting for her life, your daughter is in protective custody, and you're unemployed with mounting legal bills. This is your final opportunity to walk away. Reply yes to this message, and everything stops. Reply no, and I'll show you what real power looks like." Sarah showed the message to Danny, whose face hardened with the kind of anger that had driven him to become an investigative journalist in the first place. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. That's evidence of criminal witness intimidation. "Evidence doesn't matter if we can't get anyone to listen," Sarah replied. "He owns judges, prosecutors, reporters, government officials. How do we fight someone who can buy justice itself?" Danny was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily color in a book on the floor with the determined concentration that reminded Sarah so much of Emily. Finally, he spoke. "My ex-girlfriend Rebecca Martinez works for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She might be willing to listen if we can get to her privately, off the books. Can you trust her? She's one of the most honest people I've ever met. Clean record, no political connections, no outstanding debts or personal vulnerabilities that Cross could exploit. If anyone in law enforcement can help us, it's Rebecca." Sarah looked at her daughter, who was humming softly as she colored a picture of a house with smoke coming from the chimney and flowers in the garden. Lily deserved to grow up in a world where monsters like Julian Cross couldn't operate with complete impunity. "Set up the meeting. But Danny, if this goes wrong, if Cross has gotten to her too, then we'll figure out another way. But we can't give up now, Sarah. Emily died protecting this evidence. We owe it to her memory to see this through." But even as Sarah spoke the words of agreement, she wondered if they were already too late. Julian Cross had spent years building an empire on Emily Chen's grave, and he demonstrated that he would do absolutely anything to protect it. So far, he was winning every battle in a war that Sarah was only beginning to understand. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez met them at a 24-hour diner in Queens at 6 a.m. before the morning rush could provide cover for surveillance teams or electronic eavesdropping. She was younger than Sarah expected, maybe 35, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Danny had called in a significant personal favor to arrange this meeting, and Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders as he made introductions. Danny says you have evidence of criminal activity involving Julian Cross, Rebecca said without preamble, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to dealing with life and death situations. I'm willing to listen, but I need to warn you up front. If this is about Julian Cross, you're not the first person to make accusations against him. Sarah spread Emily's files across the sticky diner table, like tarot cards that might reveal their future. Emily Chen was murdered 3 years ago because she discovered that Cross Technologies was systematically harvesting private citizen data and selling it to foreign intelligence services. This is the evidence she died protecting. Dushering, Rebecca's expression didn't change as she reviewed the documents, but Sarah noticed her breathing quicken and her pupils dilate as she recognized the scope and implications of what Emily had uncovered. After 20 minutes of careful examination, the FBI agent looked up with an expression that mixed professional excitement with personal horror. If this material is authentic, we're looking at the biggest data breach and espionage case in American history. But I have to ask, why didn't you come forward with this evidence 3 years ago when your friend died? Sarah felt the familiar frustration of trying to explain a system that had failed her at every level. I tried to report Emily's murder to the NYPD. The detective assigned to the case said it was clearly suicide and refused to investigate further. When I pushed back with evidence that contradicted their conclusion, I was told the case was closed and that any further interference would be considered obstruction of justice. Eke, who was the detective? Lieutenant Michael Torres, Manhattan South. He seemed more interested in protecting Cross than investigating Emily's death. Rebecca made a note in the small notebook she'd produced from her jacket pocket. Torres retired early last year and bought a house in Florida worth 3 times his annual pension. The Bureau has been curious about his sudden wealth. Danny leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. Rebecca, Cross has been systematically silencing anyone who threatens his operation. Sarah was fired from her job, her daughter is in protective custody on false charges, and my editor was nearly killed in a convenient car accident yesterday. Rebecca closed Emily's laptop and looked directly at Sarah with an expression that seemed to weigh her soul. I believe you. Everything you've shown me is consistent with an ongoing investigation we've been conducting for the past 6 months. But building a federal case against someone like Cross takes time. Months, maybe years. He has lawyers who specialize in making evidence disappear and witnesses recant their testimony. How long do we have to wait for justice? Sarah asked. Give me 2 weeks to build a preliminary case file and coordinate with other agencies. Keep your heads down. Don't antagonize Cross further, and trust the system to work the way it's supposed to work. As they left the diner, Sarah felt genuine hope for the first time in 3 years. Rebecca Martinez seemed incorruptible, and federal resources could finally match Julian Cross's private army of lawyers and security contractors. Danny dropped Sarah off at his apartment before heading to work, warning her to stay inside and avoid any contact with strangers. Lily was still asleep in the guest bedroom, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the previous day. Sarah sat at Danny's kitchen table, planning their next steps and imagining Emily's reaction to finally getting justice, when her phone rang with a call that shattered her world. Miss Mitchell, this is Dr. Harrison from Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter Lily. Sarah's blood went cold with terror. What about her? She's sleeping right here in the apartment. No, ma'am, she was brought in 20 minutes ago after collapsing at school. She's conscious now and asking for you, but we need you to come immediately. That's impossible. Lily is in this apartment with me. She's sleeping in the guest bedroom. Ma'am, I'm looking at a 6-year-old girl named Lily Mitchell right now. She has your contact information listed as her emergency contact, and she specifically asked us to call you. Sarah ran to the bedroom where Lily had been sleeping. The bed was empty, the covers pulled back as if she'd gotten up to use the bathroom. On the pillow lay a note written in a child's careful handwriting. Mommy, the nice man said you needed me at the hospital. I went with him so you wouldn't worry. Love, Lily. Sarah's scream brought Danny running from the shower, half-dressed and panicked by the sound of pure terror in her voice. "He took her," Sarah sobbed, clutching the note. "Julian Cross took my daughter." Danny grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with hands that shook with adrenaline and rage. But Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number before he could complete the call. "Answer it," Danny said. "Keep him talking so we can trace the call." Sarah accepted the call with hands that trembled like leaves in a hurricane. "Hello, Sarah." Julian Cross's voice was calm and conversational, as if he were calling to discuss dinner reservations rather than kidnapping. "I imagine you're concerned about Lily. Where is she? If you hurt her, I swear to God I'll kill you myself." "Nah, she's perfectly safe and comfortable, eating ice cream and watching cartoons at a very secure location. She thinks she's helping Mommy with a special project for work." Sarah forced herself to think clearly, despite the terror clawing at her chest like a living thing. "What do you want?" "The same thing I've wanted all along. For you to abandon this foolish crusade against me. Emily Chen is dead, Sarah. Nothing you do will bring her back. But Lily is very much alive, and her future depends entirely on the decision you make in the next 60 seconds. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities and options, but every scenario ended with her daughter's death if she made the wrong choice. "How do I know she's really safe?" "Lily, say hello to Mommy." Her daughter's voice came through the phone, bright and cheerful and completely oblivious to the danger she was in. "Hi, Mommy. The nice man has a really big TV and he gave me ice cream for breakfast. He says we're playing a game where I help you make a good choice." "Lily, baby, are you okay? Are you hurt at all?" "I'm fine, Mommy. He's really nice and he has lots of games and movies. He says you're going to come get me soon if you do the right thing." Julian's voice returned with the sound of absolute control. "As you can hear, she's perfectly comfortable and happy. Now here are my terms. You have exactly 1 hour to deliver all of Emily Chen's files to the parking garage beneath the Cross Technologies building. Come alone. Any sign of police or FBI involvement, and Lily disappears permanently." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the silence of Danny's apartment. Danny was already calling Rebecca Martinez, but Sarah knew the FBI couldn't move fast enough to save her daughter. Julian Cross held all the cards now, and he was forcing her to choose between justice for Emily and Lily's life. It wasn't really a choice at all. The Cross Technologies building pierced Manhattan's skyline like a glass and steel monument to corporate power, 60 floors of technological ambition that seemed to mock Sarah as she stood in its shadow. The parking garage entrance yawned before her like the mouth of some digital beast ready to swallow her whole and digest her slowly. Sarah clutched the leather messenger bag containing Emily's laptop and all the evidence she'd spent 3 years collecting. Her hands shook as she walked toward the elevator, each step feeling like a betrayal of her dead friend's memory and sacrifice. Danny had begged her to wait for FBI backup, but Julian's deadline left no room for negotiation or tactical planning. Every minute she delayed was another minute her 6-year-old daughter spent in the hands of a man who had murdered at least 7 people to protect his criminal empire. The garage was nearly empty at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday, just a scattered collection of expensive cars that probably cost more than most people made in several years. Sarah's footsteps echoed off concrete walls as she made her way to the designated meeting spot near the main elevator bank, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She didn't have to wait long. Julian Cross emerged from a black Mercedes sedan, flanked by 2 security guards who looked more like military contractors than corporate employees. Despite everything he'd done, he was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 5'8" in his handmade Italian shoes, but he carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying that same friendly tone from their phone conversation. "Thank you for being reasonable about this situation. No, where's my daughter?" Julian gestured to one of his guards who held up a tablet displaying live video feed. Lily sat in what looked like a luxury apartment, coloring in a book while cartoons played on a massive television. She appeared completely unharmed and blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding her. "She's safe and comfortable, as promised. My people are quite fond of children." Sarah held up the messenger bag, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Here's everything. Emily's laptop, all the files, every copy I made, everything. Julian's smile was warm and paternal, the expression of a kindly grandfather rather than a murderer and traitor. I appreciate your cooperation, Sarah, but I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than a simple exchange. Sarah's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. We had a deal, the evidence for my daughter. The deal was that you would stop your crusade against me and my company. But you've already involved federal agents in this matter. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez received a very interesting package of documents yesterday evening. Sarah's heart stopped beating as she processed his words. Rebecca Martinez, their last hope for justice, had been compromised just like every other institution they'd tried to turn to for help. Julian saw her expression and nodded with satisfaction. Did you really think I wouldn't have assets inside the FBI? Agent Martinez is quite talented and ambitious, but she's also a single mother with 2 children and substantial student loan debt. A generous donation to her children's college funds and a guarantee of career advancement was sufficient to secure her cooperation. The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow, doubling her over with pain that was almost unbearable. Rebecca Martinez, who had seemed so honest and incorruptible, had sold them out for money and career prospects. Now, Julian continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. We need to discuss what happens next. You see, you've caused me considerable inconvenience over the past few days. My stock price has fluctuated due to rumors and speculation. Investors are asking uncomfortable questions. Important clients are expressing concerns about security and reliability. This situation requires a more permanent solution than simply recovering the stolen documents. One of Julian's guards stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket in a motion that Sarah recognized from action movies and nightmares. You're going to kill me, Sarah said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Unfortunately, yes, but I want you to know that Lily will be extremely well cared for. I have associates who specialize in international adoptions and child placement services. She'll have a wonderful life with a loving family in Eastern Europe. She'll receive the finest education, learn multiple languages, and grow up to be a productive member of society. She'll never remember any of this unpleasantness. Sarah thought about her daughter's bright smile, her dreams of becoming a teacher like her beloved Aunt Emily, her bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved their kingdoms from evil dragons. Lily would grow up in a foreign country, speaking a foreign language, never knowing her real name or that her mother had died trying to seek justice for a murdered friend. Emily trusted you, Sarah said, her voice carrying 3 years of accumulated rage. She worked for your company for 3 years. She believed in your mission to connect people and improve the world. How could you murder someone who had such faith in you? Julian's expression hardened, revealing the cold calculation beneath his grandfatherly facade. Emily Chen was naive and idealistic. She thought principles and morality could survive in the real world of international commerce and global politics. But information is the most valuable currency in the modern economy, Sarah. Governments need intelligence to protect their citizens and advance their interests. I simply facilitate that process for the highest bidder. You sold out your own country. You betrayed everything America stands for. I serve market forces and economic reality. National loyalty is an antiquated concept in a global economy where information flows across borders faster than governments can regulate it. Sarah saw movement in her peripheral vision and recognized Danny Rodriguez emerging from behind a concrete support pillar. He held his phone high, live streaming their conversation to his social media accounts with the steady hands of a professional journalist documenting history in real time. Every word he just said is being broadcast live to 12,000 viewers and counting, Danny announced, his voice echoing off the garage walls, including his confession to Emily Chen's murder and his admission of treason against the United States. Julian's face went white with rage and panic. Kill them both, right now. But as his guards reached for their weapons, the garage filled with the sound of squealing tires and roaring engines. FBI vehicles poured down the access ramps from 3 different directions, surrounding them in a coordinated operation that spoke of careful planning and professional execution. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez emerged from the lead vehicle, her weapon drawn and her face set in an expression of grim determination. Julian Cross, you're under arrest for conspiracy, treason, murder, and kidnapping. Sarah stared at Rebecca in complete confusion, her mind struggling to process this reversal. But you betrayed us. You sold us out to him. In a year, Rebecca smiled grimly as FBI agents swarmed around Julian Cross and his security team. Actually, I sold him out. We've been building a case against Cross Technologies for 2 years, but we needed evidence of his personal involvement in criminal activity. When you brought us Emily's files, they provided the final pieces we needed to obtain federal warrants. As handcuffs clicked around Julian Cross's wrists, Sarah felt her knees buckle with relief and exhaustion. Where's Lily? Where's my daughter? Safe house in Brooklyn, Rebecca replied, holstering her weapon. We tracked the vehicle that took her and moved in 30 minutes ago. She's asking for chocolate chip cookies and wondering why there are so many police officers around. Danny wrapped his arms around Sarah as she sobbed with relief that felt like drowning in reverse. The live stream was still running, capturing Julian Cross being read his rights while thousands of viewers watched justice finally being served in real time. But even as relief flooded through her system like a drug, Sarah knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Julian Cross had built an empire on corruption and murder, and tearing it down would require years of trials and investigations and careful legal work. At least now, Emily Chen's sacrifice wouldn't be meaningless. Justice was finally possible. 3 weeks after Julian Cross's arrest, Sarah sat in a secure conference room within the FBI's Manhattan field office, surrounded by evidence boxes and computer screens that painted a picture of corruption so vast and systematic that it challenged her understanding of how American institutions actually function. The room smelled of coffee and copy machine toner, but the atmosphere was electric with the energy of investigators finally able to pursue a case without political interference or resource limitations. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez spread surveillance photographs across the conference table, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that revealed the true face of American power. Cross wasn't operating in isolation, she explained, her voice carrying the weight of discoveries that had shocked even veteran federal investigators. He had a network of accomplices and enablers throughout government, law enforcement, corporate America, and academic institutions. We're talking about a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of American society. Sarah studied the photographs, recognizing several faces from news broadcasts, magazine covers, and political rallies. Senators, federal judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, university presidents, military contractors. People she'd trusted to protect American interests had been systematically selling out their own citizens for profit and political advantage. How many people knew about Emily's investigation before she was murdered? Rebecca consulted a thick file folder. At least 15 that we've identified so far, and probably more. Cross sent a company-wide memo about security concerns and internal threats the day before Emily's death. Everyone on this list received a copy, along with instructions to report any suspicious employee behavior. Danny looked up from his laptop, where he'd been working on a comprehensive follow-up story for the Tribune. The medical examiner who ruled Emily's death a suicide just purchased a boat worth $200,000. Cash transaction, no financing. Dr. William Chen, Rebecca confirmed. No relation to Emily, despite the surname. He's been cooperating with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges and witness protection. Sarah felt sick as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Emily had been surrounded by people who either wanted her dead or were willing to look the other way when she was murdered, all in exchange for money or career advancement, or simply out of fear of crossing Julian Cross. What about Detective Torres, the one who refused to investigate Emily's death? Retired to Florida after making some very profitable real estate investments. We're working on extradition, but his lawyers are claiming the statute of limitations protects him from prosecution. The scope of the corruption was overwhelming and disheartening. Sarah had thought Julian Cross was a monster acting alone, but he'd actually been part of a vast network that valued profit over human life and treated murder as just another business expense. There's something else you need to know, Rebecca said, her voice careful and measured. We found evidence that Cross had been planning to eliminate you and Lily permanently after recovering Emily's files. The international adoption story was a complete fabrication designed to make you cooperate. Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she imagined what would have happened if Danny hadn't live-streamed their confrontation. What was his real plan? Murder-suicide. You would have been found dead in your apartment with a note confessing to mental illness and expressing guilt over Emily's death. Lily would have died from an apparent overdose of your prescription medication. Cross's people had already prepared the crime scene. Danny reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand, his touch grounding her in the present moment. You saved yourself by being smarter and braver than he expected. Rebecca pulled out another file, this one marked with red tape indicating classified information. We also discovered that Cross had been systematically targeting whistleblowers and journalists for years. Emily wasn't his first victim by a long shot. We've identified at least 12 other suspicious deaths connected to people who threatened his operations or those of his associates. The weight of those lost lives settled on Sarah's shoulders like a lead blanket. Emily's death hadn't been an isolated incident of corporate greed. It had been part of a systematic campaign of murder designed to protect a criminal enterprise that generated billions of dollars in illegal profits. What happens now to Cross and his network? Cross himself is facing federal charges that could result in multiple life sentences. Conspiracy, treason, racketeering, multiple counts of murder. His company's assets have been frozen, and we're working with international partners to trace money he moved to offshore accounts. And the others, the senators and judges and corporate executives who helped him? Rebecca's expression darkened with frustration. That's where things get more complicated. Some of them are claiming they didn't know Cross was selling data to foreign governments, that they thought they were participating in legitimate intelligence operations. Others are arguing that their cooperation was part of authorized national security programs. Sarah felt the familiar anger rising in her chest like lava in a volcano. So they're going to escape justice? Not if I have anything to say about it, Danny interjected, his journalist instincts fully engaged. I've got sources in every major news organization, plus independent bloggers and podcasters who aren't beholden to corporate advertisers. This story isn't going away just because some powerful people want it buried. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Public pressure is our most effective weapon against the parts of this conspiracy that we can't prosecute directly. The court of public opinion doesn't require the same burden of proof as criminal proceedings. Sarah's phone buzzed with a call from Lily's school principal. Her daughter had been back in regular classes for 2 weeks, but the trauma of her kidnapping was still affecting her behavior and academic performance. Miss Mitchell, this is Principal Morrison. Lily's having another difficult day. She's asking for you and seems quite distressed. I'll be right there. As Sarah gathered her things to leave, Rebecca touched her arm gently. Sarah, I want you to know that what you did required incredible courage. Most people would have walked away when Cross threatened their child. I couldn't let Emily's death be meaningless. She deserved justice, and so did all his other victims. She got it because of you, and because of your courage. 12 families are finally going to know what really happened to their loved ones. That matters more than you might realize. Walking through Manhattan toward Lily's school, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She'd lost her job at the Sterling, but the publicity from Julian Cross's arrest had generated job offers from law firms, advocacy organizations, and government agencies across the country. Lily was in therapy to process her trauma, but she was resilient and surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. Most importantly, Emily Chen's name was no longer associated with suicide and shame. The woman who had died trying to protect American citizens was finally being remembered as the hero she'd always been. Justice was slow and imperfect, but it was finally being served. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the front row of federal district court in Lower Manhattan, watching Julian Cross's defense attorney deliver an opening statement that attempted to reframe treason and murder as legitimate business practices. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' families, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case through Danny's reporting and social media coverage. Julian Cross looked smaller and more fragile than Sarah remembered from their confrontation in the parking garage. His expensive suits had been replaced by standard prison attire, his perfectly styled hair was now unkempt and graying, and his arrogant confidence had been replaced by the hollow stare of someone who finally understood that money couldn't buy immunity from consequences. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, defense attorney Marcus Webb began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who specialized in defending the indefensible. My client stands accused of terrible crimes based on evidence that was obtained through illegal surveillance, entrapment, and coercion. Julian Cross is not a traitor or a murderer. He's a visionary businessman who made difficult decisions in a complex global marketplace where the traditional rules of national sovereignty no longer apply. Sarah felt her jaw clench with anger as Webb continued his opening statement, painting Cross as a patriot who had been serving American interests by gathering intelligence on foreign governments. Even now, facing overwhelming evidence of his crimes, Cross's legal team was trying to justify murder and treason as national service. Federal prosecutor Elena Santos rose for the government's opening statement, her voice cutting through Webb's rhetoric like a surgical blade. Over the next 4 weeks, we will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Julian Cross systematically betrayed his country, murdered American citizens who threatened to expose his crimes, and built a criminal empire worth billions of dollars on the graves of patriots like Emily Chen. The trial proceeded methodically, each day revealing new layers of corruption and violence. Emily's encrypted files were presented as evidence, their contents projected onto large screens for the jury and public gallery to see. Financial records showing millions of dollars flowing from foreign intelligence services to Cross's network of shell companies. Recorded conversations where Cross discussed eliminating security threats and problem employees with the casual indifference of someone ordering coffee. Danny covered the trial comprehensively for the Tribune, his daily articles ensuring that Cross's crimes remained in the public consciousness. The hashtag Justice for Emily trended consistently on social media as people around the world followed the proceedings and shared their own stories of corporate abuse and institutional corruption. On the 7th day of testimony, Sarah took the witness stand to tell Emily's story and explain how she'd uncovered evidence of Cross's criminal enterprise. Miss Mitchell, prosecutor Santos began, please tell the jury about your relationship with Emily Chen and what motivated you to investigate her death. Sarah looked directly at the jury as she answered, making eye contact with each of the 12 men and women who would decide Julian Cross's fate. Emily was my best friend and the most principled person I've ever known. We met in law school at Columbia, where she was studying technology law and corporate governance. She was brilliant, passionate about justice, and completely incapable of taking her own life as the police initially claimed. Nakan Honam. What made you certain that her death wasn't suicide? Sarah shifted her gaze to Julian Cross, who stared back at her with cold hatred. Emily had been systematically documenting Cross Technology's illegal activities for months before she died. She'd contacted journalists, consulted with law enforcement about whistleblower protections, and even made an appointment to testify before Congress about corporate data abuse. Someone planning suicide doesn't make detailed arrangements to expose corporate crime and testify before federal legislators. Defense attorney Webb tried to undermine Sarah's credibility during cross-examination, suggesting that her investigation had been motivated by financial gain rather than justice. Miss Mitchell, isn't it true that you were obsessed with your friend's death to an unhealthy degree? That you harassed police officers, hired private investigators you couldn't afford, and ultimately threatened my client based on conspiracy theories and circumstantial evidence? Sarah remained calm despite Webb's aggressive questioning. I sought justice for my murdered friend using every legal means available to me. If that makes me obsessed, I accept the characterization proudly. You've received significant financial benefits from pursuing this case, haven't you? Book deals, speaking engagements, job offers, media appearances. I would trade every dollar I've made to have Emily back alive. Money was never the motivation for seeking justice. The most devastating testimony came from Dr. William Chen, the medical examiner who had falsified Emily's autopsy results. Under immunity for his cooperation, he detailed how Cross's representatives had approached him with both financial incentives and threats against his family. I knew Emily Chen didn't commit suicide the moment I examined her body, he testified, his voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. The trauma patterns were completely inconsistent with someone who had jumped voluntarily. The injuries suggested she had been pushed or thrown from the building. But Cross's people offered me more money than I would make in 10 years of government service, and they made it very clear that refusing their offer wasn't really an option. Julian Cross's former head of security, Michael Torres, provided equally damning testimony about the systematic intimidation and elimination of potential witnesses and whistleblowers. Cross maintained what he called a problem list, Torres explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone confessing to monstrous crimes. Names of employees, journalists, government officials, anyone who threatened the operation. My job was to make those problems disappear through whatever means necessary. When you say disappear, what specifically do you mean? Sometimes it meant bribes or blackmail or professional destruction. Sometimes it meant physical intimidation or threats against family members. And sometimes it meant permanent elimination through murder. The defense tried to argue that Torres was lying to save himself from prosecution, but financial records and communications logs corroborated every aspect of his testimony. Wire transfers from Cross's accounts to offshore assassination services. Encrypted messages discussing specific targets and timelines. Even recorded phone calls where Cross personally ordered the deaths of people who threatened his criminal enterprise. On the final day of testimony, prosecutor Santos played the recording of Cross confessing to Emily's murder in the parking garage, his voice filling the courtroom as he admitted to selling classified American intelligence to foreign governments and ordering the deaths of American citizens who tried to stop him. Defense attorney Webb made a desperate closing argument about government overreach, the complexity of modern international commerce, and the impossibility of applying traditional legal standards to global technology companies, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury's verdict was never really in doubt. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. We, the jury, find the defendant, Julian Cross, guilty on all counts. Sarah felt tears of relief and vindication streaming down her face as the verdict was read aloud. Guilty of treason, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of racketeering, guilty of 7 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Cross to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her words carrying the weight of final judgment. Mr. Cross, you have betrayed every principle upon which this nation was founded. You sold our most precious resources, the private information and personal security of our citizens, to hostile foreign powers for personal profit. You murdered patriots who tried to stop your criminal enterprise. Your crimes represent such a fundamental violation of the social contract that only the ultimate penalty would be truly appropriate. But since capital punishment is not available in this jurisdiction, you will spend the remainder of your natural life reflecting on the lives you destroyed and the country you betrayed. As Julian Cross was led away in shackles, he looked directly at Sarah for the first time during the entire trial. There was no remorse in his eyes, no recognition of wrongdoing, only the cold calculation of someone already planning his appeal and eventual return to power. But Sarah was no longer afraid of Julian Cross or the system that had protected him for so long. He was just another convicted criminal now, stripped of his wealth and influence, and facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Emily Chen finally had her justice, and the world was a little bit safer for everyone. 1 year after Julian Cross's conviction, Sarah stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee in a hearing room that had witnessed some of the most important moments in American political history. The chamber was packed with reporters, victims' families, corporate accountability activists, and citizens who had traveled from across the country to witness this moment of potential institutional reform. Ms. Mitchell, Committee Chairwoman Senator Patricia Walsh began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades fighting for government transparency. Your investigation uncovered a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government, law enforcement, and corporate America. In your professional opinion, based on everything you've learned over the past 4 years, how do we prevent another Julian Cross? Sarah looked at the panel of senators arrayed before her, knowing that several of them had received substantial campaign contributions from Cross Technologies and other companies with similar business models. She had spent months preparing for this testimony, working with legal experts and policy advocates to develop concrete recommendations for systemic reform. Senator Walsh, the fundamental problem isn't just individual corruption or criminal behavior. It's a system that allows concentrated wealth to purchase immunity from consequences and manipulate democratic institutions for private gain. Julian Cross operated successfully for over a decade because he had enough money to buy protection from the very people who were supposed to regulate his industry and prosecute his crimes. Senator James Harrison, a known ally of corporate interests and recipient of significant technology industry donations, leaned forward aggressively. Miss Mitchell, aren't you overstating the case here? Mr. Cross was ultimately prosecuted successfully and is now serving multiple life sentences. Doesn't that prove the system worked exactly as it should? Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that had sustained her through 4 years of fighting for justice. With respect, Senator Harrison, the system didn't work for Emily Chen. It didn't work for the 12 other whistleblowers and journalists who were murdered trying to expose Cross's crimes. It didn't work for the millions of American citizens whose private data was sold to foreign intelligence services. The system only worked after a single mother with no resources and everything to lose forced it to work through personal sacrifice and incredible risk. Over the past year, Sarah had worked closely with FBI investigators to identify and prosecute Cross's extensive network of accomplices and enablers. 18 government officials had been indicted, including 3 federal judges, 2 senators, and a deputy director of the National Security Agency. 12 corporate executives faced charges for knowingly facilitating the sale of classified information and American citizens' private data to foreign governments. However, many of the most powerful conspirators had escaped prosecution by claiming they were victims of Cross's deception rather than willing participants in his criminal enterprise. Their lawyers had successfully argued that accepting campaign contributions or consulting fees didn't constitute criminal conspiracy, even when those payments came from proceeds of treason and murder. The committee's investigation has revealed that Cross Technologies and its affiliated companies donated over $150 million to political campaigns, lobbying efforts, and policy advocacy organizations over the past decade, Senator Walsh continued. How do we address the corrupting influence of money in politics when that money might be flowing from criminal enterprises operating under the cover of legitimate business? We need complete transparency in political funding, Sarah replied, consulting the notes she'd prepared with the help of campaign finance experts. Every political donation should be traced to its ultimate source. If foreign governments or criminal organizations are funding American elections through shell corporations and front groups, voters have a right to know who's really paying for the political advertisements they see. Danny Rodriguez sat in the press gallery, documenting Sarah's testimony for the book they were co-authoring about Emily's case and its aftermath. Justice Delayed: How Corporate Power Corrupts American Democracy would be published next month, with proceeds funding the Emily Chen Foundation for whistleblower protection and government accountability. After 6 hours of testimony and questioning, Sarah walked through the Capitol building toward the Senate steps, where Lily waited with Danny's parents. Her daughter had adapted remarkably well to their new life in Washington, where Sarah worked as a senior consultant for the Department of Justice's newly created Corporate Accountability Division. "How did it go, Mommy?" Lily asked, taking Sarah's hand as they walked through the afternoon sunshine. "Good, sweetheart. We told them about Aunt Emily and why it's important for people to tell the truth, even when powerful people don't want them to." "Are all the bad people going to jail now?" Sarah knelt down to Lily's eye level, choosing her words carefully. "Some of them are, baby. But the most important thing is that people are listening now. They're going to make new rules to protect good people like Aunt Emily, who try to keep everyone safe." As they walked down the Capitol steps toward the street, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert that made her smile. Former FBI agent Rebecca Martinez, appointed special prosecutor for technology crimes and corporate espionage. Rebecca had become not just a professional colleague, but a close personal friend over the past year. And her appointment meant that future cases involving corporate crime and government corruption would be handled by someone who understood the stakes and wasn't afraid to challenge powerful interests. But not all the news was encouraging. Julian Cross had been appealing his conviction from his maximum security federal prison cell, and his new legal team was arguing that prosecutorial misconduct and procedural errors had violated his constitutional rights. Sarah knew it was likely a desperate legal strategy, but wealthy criminals had successfully overturned convictions before through endless appeals and technical challenges. "Sarah Mitchell!" A familiar voice called from across the street. Sarah looked up to see Dr. Jennifer Chen, Emily's sister, waving from the steps of the Supreme Court building. Jennifer had become a prominent advocate for data privacy rights and corporate accountability, using her platform as a prominent physician to educate the public about the medical and social implications of data theft and corporate surveillance. "How did the hearing go?" Jennifer asked as she approached their small group. "Better than I expected. Some of the senators actually seemed interested in meaningful reform rather than just political theater and damage control." "I have news about the civil lawsuit against Cross Technologies and its executives. The company agreed to settle with the victims' families for $1.2 billion. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. No amount of money could bring back Emily or the other victims, but the settlement would provide financial security for their families and fund ongoing efforts to prevent similar crimes in the future. "Emily would be proud of everything you've accomplished," Jennifer said, hugging Sarah tightly. "I don't think we're finished yet," Sarah replied. "Cross still has allies and enablers out there. The network he built didn't disappear just because he went to prison." As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone rang with a call from an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Miss Mitchell, this is Thomas Crawford, Julian Cross's appellate attorney. My client would like to arrange a meeting with you. He claims to have information about ongoing national security threats that only you would be qualified to understand and act upon." Sarah felt a familiar chill run down her spine. Even from maximum security federal prison, Julian Cross was still trying to manipulate events and people to serve his interests. "I'm not interested in anything Mr. Cross has to say." He mentioned Emily Chen specifically. He says there are aspects of her death and the broader conspiracy that weren't revealed during his trial. Information that allegedly puts you and your daughter in ongoing danger from other members of his network. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a growing sense of unease and foreboding. Julian Cross had lost his freedom, his fortune, and his power, but apparently he still had one final card to play in a game that Sarah was only beginning to understand. The war for justice and accountability was far from over. Sarah sat across from Julian Cross in the federal prison's maximum security visitor room, separated by reinforced glass that felt like a barrier between different worlds. 2 years of incarceration had aged him dramatically. His once perfectly styled hair was now completely gray and unkempt, his expensive wardrobe replaced by orange prison clothes, but his pale blue eyes still held that same calculating intelligence that had made him one of America's most dangerous criminals. The room smelled of disinfectant and despair, filled with the conversations of other inmates speaking with family members, lawyers, and journalists. Guards stood at strategic positions, monitoring every interaction with the bored efficiency of people who had seen every possible human drama play out within these walls. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," Cross said, his voice carrying an eerie calm that reminded her of their first meeting at the Sterling. "I wasn't entirely certain you would accept my invitation. I'm here because you mentioned Emily and claim to have information that affects my daughter's safety. If you're playing games with their memory and well-being, I promise you'll regret it." Cross smiled with what might have been genuine amusement, though it was difficult to tell with someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of manipulation. "Always direct and to the point. That's what made you so unexpectedly dangerous, Sarah. You never learned to think strategically or consider the broader implications of your actions. Get to the point. What information do you supposedly have that's worth risking my time and emotional health?" Cross leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, despite the monitored phone line connecting them. Emily Chen wasn't just investigating corporate data theft and illegal information sales. She discovered something much more significant and dangerous. Something that's still happening, even with me imprisoned and my company dismantled. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with familiar dread. "You're lying to manipulate me into some kind of appeal strategy or media campaign." The foreign governments purchasing American citizens' data weren't just interested in intelligence gathering or commercial advantage. They were building comprehensive targeting profiles for a specific type of coordinated attack against American infrastructure. Power grids, water treatment systems, transportation networks, communication systems. Emily found evidence of a planned operation that would cripple American society and create the conditions for fundamental political change. Sarah studied Cross's face carefully, looking for signs of deception or mental illness. "If that's true, why didn't you mention it during your trial? Why keep quiet about a massive conspiracy against American infrastructure? Because the people planning and funding these attacks weren't just foreign agents and enemy governments. They included American officials at the highest levels of government, including some who are still in power, still planning, still waiting for the optimal moment to execute their strategy. The implications of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. You expect me to believe that you discovered evidence of a massive domestic conspiracy and kept quiet about it to protect national security? I kept quiet because I was an active participant in the conspiracy, Cross replied, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone confessing to jaywalking rather than treason. The data sales were never primarily about generating revenue, Sarah. They were about preparing for a fundamental transformation in how America is governed, a change that's still coming, regardless of my personal circumstances. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the scope of what Cross was claiming. You're talking about treason and sedition on a scale that makes your original conviction look like a minor corporate crime. I'm talking about a shadow government that's been operating for decades, using technology companies like mine to gradually transfer American sovereignty to international governing bodies and global corporate interests. Emily stumbled onto evidence of the final operational phase. The sterile prison visiting room seemed to fade around Sarah as she contemplated the magnitude of Cross's claims. If he was telling the truth, Emily's murder hadn't just been about silencing a corporate whistleblower. It had been about protecting a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of American government and threatened the foundations of democratic society. Why tell me this now? What could you possibly hope to gain? Because the operational timeline is accelerating. The infrastructure attacks are scheduled to begin within the next 18 months. Once they succeed and create sufficient chaos, martial law will be declared, and the shadow government will have the justification they need to suspend constitutional protections permanently. And you think I can somehow stop a conspiracy involving the highest levels of government and international corporate power? Cross laughed bitterly, a sound like breaking glass in the confined space. You stopped me, didn't you? A part-time law student and full-time waitress brought down an $8 billion criminal empire. Never underestimate the power of someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sarah felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Even if I believed you, how would I prove any of this? You're a convicted traitor serving multiple life sentences. No credible person would take your word about anything. Emily hid additional evidence, files and documents I never found, despite interrogating her extensively before her death. The casual mention of Emily's torture made Sarah's vision blur with rage that felt like molten metal in her veins. You tortured her for information. For nearly 6 hours, trying to get her to reveal the location of her backup files and the identities of her contacts outside the company. She never broke, never gave us anything useful. That's how I knew she was a true patriot, unlike most of the rest of us who were simply serving our own interests. Sarah fought the urge to hang up the phone and walk away from this conversation. Every word Cross spoke was an admission of monstrous cruelty that made her want to scream. But if Emily had hidden additional evidence, it might be the key to exposing an even greater conspiracy than the one that had already been prosecuted. Where are the files? Cross smiled with genuine amusement for the first time during their conversation. Emily was far more intelligent and strategic than any of us realized at the time. She didn't just copy digital information onto encrypted drives. She printed physical documents and hid them somewhere she knew they would be safe from corporate security teams and government agents. Where? Think about Emily's personality and habits, Sarah. Where did she go when she needed to feel safe and centered? Where did she volunteer her time when she wasn't working or studying? Sarah's breath caught as understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The Children's Library at Columbia, where she volunteered every Saturday. Fifth floor archives behind the collection of children's books donated in memory of her grandmother. Emily had access to restricted storage areas that hadn't been opened or cataloged in decades. She hid the most sensitive documents there, along with instructions for how to safely contact her network of sources within government and corporate America. Sarah stood up abruptly, her heart racing with possibility and terror. If you're lying about this, if this is some kind of elaborate manipulation to get media attention or sympathy for your appeals. I'm already serving multiple life sentences in maximum security federal prison, Sarah. What could I possibly gain by lying to you at this point? But if I'm telling the truth and you do nothing with this information, Emily's death will have been truly meaningless. The country she died trying to protect will cease to exist as a constitutional democracy. As Sarah walked toward the exit, Cross's voice followed her through the monitored phone line. Sarah, you need to understand something crucial. They know we've had this conversation. They monitor all communications from this facility. You have maybe 48 hours before they move against you and anyone else who might threaten the final phase of their operation. Sarah broke into a run. 4 hours later, she stood in the Columbia University Children's Library with Lily coloring quietly at a nearby table, while Danny kept watch by the windows. The familiar smell of books and childhood memories couldn't mask the tension that filled the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Behind a collection of donated children's books that had belonged to Emily's grandmother, Sarah found a manila envelope marked with Emily's careful handwriting. For Sarah, who never stopped believing in justice and truth. Inside were documents that made Julian Cross's original crimes look like minor infractions compared to what they revealed. Evidence of a coordinated plan to collapse American infrastructure through cyber attacks, blame foreign terrorists for the chaos, and use the resulting national emergency to install an international governing council with unprecedented power over American citizens and democratic institutions. The plan was called Operation Reset, and according to Emily's meticulously documented notes, it was scheduled to begin in exactly 14 months with simultaneous attacks on power grids in 12 major metropolitan areas. Sarah photographed every document with hands that shook with adrenaline, uploaded the images to multiple secure cloud storage services, and sent encrypted copies to Danny, Rebecca Martinez, and investigative journalists at 5 different news organizations. Then she picked up Lily and ran toward an uncertain future. Because Emily Chen's final gift wasn't just evidence of a conspiracy, it was a warning that the fight for American democracy was entering its most dangerous phase. And this time, Sarah wouldn't be fighting alone. Emily's courage had inspired a movement of citizens, journalists, and government officials who refused to let corruption triumph over justice. The billionaire who had ordered steak and received a note that changed everything was now behind bars. But the forces that had created and protected him were still out there, still planning, still waiting for their moment to fundamentally transform American society. Somewhere in America, another ordinary person was about to discover evidence that would test their courage and determination. Another David was preparing to face Goliath in a battle that would determine whether democracy could survive in an age of corporate power and global conspiracy. Justice, Sarah had learned, wasn't a destination you reached and then celebrated. It was a continuous journey that required constant vigilance, personal sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for truth even when the odds seemed impossible. But it was a journey worth taking, no matter the cost, because the alternative was surrendering the future to people who valued power and profit over human dignity and democratic principles. Emily Chen's sacrifice had lit a candle in the darkness. Now it was up to others to keep that flame burning until justice finally prevailed. Sarah Mitchell's story proves that no one is too powerful to face justice when ordinary people have the courage to stand up and fight. But her victory came at an enormous personal cost, and it raises uncomfortable questions about how our society really works. How many other Julian Crosses are out there right now, hiding behind corporate boardrooms and political connections? How many Emily Chens have died trying to protect us from people who see human lives as expendable business expenses? And most importantly, what would you do if you discovered evidence of a crime that powerful people desperately wanted to keep hidden? These aren't just questions for other people to answer. In our interconnected world, each of us might someday face a moment when we have to choose between personal safety and doing what's right. Sarah's story shows us that ordinary people can change the world, but it also shows us the price that change sometimes demands. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you why truth and justice matter, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Sarah's journey resonated with you most? Do you think you would have made the same choices she did? And if you believe these kinds of stories matter, if you think we need more investigations into corporate corruption and government accountability, Please hit that like button to help this story reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because the fight for justice doesn't end with Sarah's victory. It continues with each of us, in the choices we make and the courage we show when it matters most. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply refusing to stay silent. Until next time, keep questioning, keep fighting, and never forget that your voice matters more than you know.